The Packers on the road against the San Francisco 49ers tonight to begin NFL Week 9 action. The return of the MAC going on Wednesday night. Many different of you watched all of those different games taking place last night. Good distraction to have some college football in the middle of the week. The NBA is returning, according to reports, on December 22nd and playing a 72-game schedule, meaning the NBA will be out of commission for a very short period of time. One thing that's sneaking up on a lot of people is college basketball is going to be back pretty soon. And it hasn't gotten anywhere near the amount of attention. When last we saw college basketball was the conference tournaments that were suddenly halted in the middle of play back in March. We obviously did not have the NCAA tournament, and so many of the best basketball teams will be returning to action in the near future in the college basketball universe. In the college football universe, I'm going to give you my gambling picks for college football to finish out the hour here momentarily in a little bit. But I will say this. I'm really intrigued to see what's going to happen with Notre Dame hosting Clemson without Trevor Lawrence. And I'm surprised this game, as we get closer and closer to kickoff, I think it's clearly, look, Florida-Georgia is going to be, I think, a massively entertaining game. Whoever wins that battle is going to win the SEC East. I think it's the most interesting game of the weekend, Florida-Georgia. But outside of Florida-Georgia, Notre Dame really has an opportunity to firmly push itself into the college football playoff if they could beat Clemson without Trevor Lawrence. And meanwhile, for Clemson, which is right now the number one overall team in the country, this is really the only challenging game left on their schedule. They finish, and I understand Virginia Tech fans are like, hey, what about us? They finish at Florida State, no challenge at all for Clemson there. Pittsburgh comes to town. Pittsburgh has been a very up and down team. I don't really think that's a fear. And again, I'm assuming that Trevor Lawrence is going to be back healthy for the final 3 weeks of the season because they have a bye week coming up after this week. Clemson does. And then you've got, then you finish at Virginia Tech. So maybe that Virginia Tech game could be a little bit of a challenge for Clemson. But basically, if they win this game and they're favored by 5 or 5.5 points, depending on where you look, Clemson is basically punching their ticket for the college football playoff if they win this game. Because even if they lost the ACC championship game, I think a 10-1 Clemson team would be into the Final Four. But Notre Dame really has the opportunity to firmly put themselves in the college football playoff picture, because if they beat Clemson here, then they go to BC, and I know there's a good rivalry there, Catholic school tradition, Notre Dame, Boston College rivalry game in general. Then they go to North Carolina. Mac Brown's team has stumbled a bit this year relative to expectations. Syracuse is bad. They're sitting at 1-6. No real fear there. And then Wake is decent under Dave Clawson, but not a lot of fear there either. If Notre Dame wins this game, even if they lose to Clemson, which I think they would do in the ACC championship game, I think they have a decent argument to be the fourth team in for the college football playoff. And similarly, if you look at Florida, Georgia right now, both of those teams have losses, so they really don't have mulligans left. The battle for the fourth playoff team, we're going to learn a lot, because whoever loses in the Florida-Georgia game is not only going to lose the SEC East and the opportunity to play in the national in that national showcase game, they're also going to lose the opportunity to play, spoiler, in the college football playoff as potentially the number 4 seed. So this is, to me, a really intriguing weekend in college football. We had the MAC yesterday kind of kicking off the weekend in college football. But Notre Dame, can they get a monster signature win and basically punch their ticket to the ACC championship game? Clemson, if they get the win, they're done, right? Like, they're not going to lose one of the final 3, I don't think. They would then surge to 10-0. And once they got to 10-0, they're set and ready. No matter what happens in the ACC championship game, they're in the playoff. And I feel, by the way, the same thing about Alabama, who is right now 6-0 and on their bye week as they get ready for LSU. If Alabama comes out and wins and goes 10-0 in the regular season and then they're sitting there in the SEC championship game, and they lost to Florida or Georgia, I don't think there's any doubt that either of those teams are in the playoff based on where we are right now, Clemson and Alabama. Ohio State has looked very good through 3 weeks. I think you have to kind of gamble on the fact that Ohio State gets the third playoff spot. So the fourth playoff spot is going to come out of this mix of teams, Florida, Georgia, and one of those teams will be eliminated this weekend in the cocktail party. Notre Dame, who has an important opportunity to make a statement in that game against Clemson this weekend. Certainly, you could make an argument that somebody from the Pac-12 could be alive. Really, I asked Jeff Schwartz that, but I genuinely believe that if, for instance, Oregon went undefeated, they could find themselves in the mix because the Pac-12 has an opening a little bit because the Big 12 has played themselves out of the playoff race. I also think you have to look down at Texas A&M. Now, the Aggies are traveling all the way across the country to play against South Carolina this weekend. But if you look at the remainder of A&M's schedule, there's a decent chance, that they could go 9-1 and steal that fourth playoff bid, assuming that Alabama goes 11-0. Then who else is going to stand out? If Alabama goes 11-0, they would be beating the Florida-Georgia winner for a second loss. The Florida-Georgia loser would already have 2 losses. I'm not sure who else you point to. Oklahoma State is unlikely at this point to run the table. And so the Big 12 champ is going to have at least 2 losses, seems very likely. And so I don't even know who you point to that could be in the mix. I think you could point to an Oregon or a USC. USC has a very favorable schedule based on how bad the Pac-12 South is. Oregon is the most talented team in the Pac-12. Both of those teams would need to go 6-0 in the regular season, play all their games, and then also play and win the Pac-12 championship game. Now, the other challenge out there in the grand scheme of things is how many games are you going to actually get to play? So far, most of college football has been okay, but I'm a little bit nervous, honestly, about the Halloween weekend. Because if you remember being on a college campus on Halloween, there were undoubtedly a ton of Halloween parties out there. And so far, we haven't really seen any significant impact from players testing positive after Halloween. But that happened on Saturday, and the average player test positive for, not just player, but the average person test positive for COVID 4 or 5 days after exposure. That would mean we're moving right into that window today. And some of those COVID positives, if they happen for Halloween weekend, especially for teams that were on their bye week, some of those might start to reveal themselves, not even for this weekend, but going into the next weekend of games. So that is something I think you have to pay attention to because we could end up with other teams in that Wisconsin-like scenario where you don't even know necessarily what's going to happen with the season. I think there's a decent chance, unfortunately for Wisconsin Badger fans, I think there's a decent chance, and I said this back when they tested positive, missed their first game against Nebraska. Now the game against Purdue has been canceled. I think there's a decent chance that Wisconsin, unfortunately, has to cancel the rest of their football season. Because if they can't play these 2 weeks, which they can't, obviously against Nebraska and against Purdue, if they're not able to come back and play against Michigan on next Saturday, then they're not eligible. They're not eligible to win the Big Ten West and advance to play against, theoretically, Ohio State with a playoff berth on the line. So that in and of itself is going to be a mess. And also, let's say that Wisconsin runs the table the rest of the way, missing the 2 games that they have played. They're basically going to be playing the same length of schedule of the Pac-12. So and I believe I'm correct in this, one of you can look it up. I think Wisconsin, if they got to play every game they have remaining on their schedule and they went to the Pac-12, the Big Ten title game, and they won it, would finish 7-0. Is that enough of a resume to be able to go to the college football playoff? I think the answer is probably yes, but I'm not 100% sure on that. If you have a lot of other resumes, for instance, what happens if you compare 10-1 Notre Dame with 7-0 Wisconsin? I kind of think 10-1 Notre Dame is much more impressive just because they would have played 4 more games and they would have played Clemson twice than what we would see with Wisconsin. Something worth keeping in mind as we go forward. A bunch of big show-me games in college football this weekend, including that Florida-Georgia game, which if you have never been to Florida, Georgia, I know it'll be a little bit different, a lot different this year. 50% the stadium, Florida, 50% the stadium, Georgia. It's an incredible weekend. Just a fantastic, phenomenal weekend of activities down in Jacksonville. It's one of the great college football venues to go check out at some point in time. A monster party throughout all of the area around Jacksonville, up into the islands in Georgia, all the way down to Jack's Beach, and everything around Jacksonville is pretty phenomenal for that Florida-Georgia game. Easy trip over for Florida fans who are in the Gainesville area, Florida college kids. Easy trip down from Athens for Georgia fans. I mean, it's just it's a monster game. And whoever wins that game, and by the way, I think it's going to be Florida, and I think Florida is going to win because Kyle Trask is a difference maker at quarterback. And nothing against Stetson Bennett, the quarterback for Georgia, but he's just not of the same caliber that Kyle Trask is. And this line opened, I think, with Florida as a 5 or 6 point favorite. I thought that was way too many. It's now been bet all the way down to Georgia as a 3.5 point favorite. But I feel like the wrong team is favored here. I don't think that Georgia has the offensive firepower to be able to keep up with Florida. And the Florida defense is getting better and better. But you look at what the Georgia offense has done the last 6 quarters, they've scored 14 points. It's 2 quarters against Alabama and the entire game against Kentucky. 14 points in the last 6 quarters. 2 interceptions for Stetson Bennett in the game against Kentucky. He also struggled mightily in the second half against Alabama. I just think Georgia is going to have a lot of difficulty against Florida. So giving you a couple of early picks, and I'll give all my college football gambling picks out here momentarily. But I think that Georgia is going to lose outright as the favorite against Florida. And I also like Notre Dame's chances against Clemson to find a way to cover that game. True freshman, DJ, whose last name I've got to learn how to pronounce perfectly, but I think he's going to be in a tough environment. Ordinarily, it would be a super tough environment if there were going to be massive crowds present for a road game in college football, but that's not going to be the case, obviously, this year. I still feel like we're going to see a situation where Notre Dame finds a way to win and where Florida finds a way to win, both underdogs.